Okay, let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Kimberly Bolero, and I am the director of the Holocaust Education Resource and Outreach Center, or the HERO Center, at Voices of Hope here in Connecticut. I know we have a number of teachers joining us from across Connecticut and out of state, so let us know where you are joining us from in the chat box. We would love to see where everyone here is based. This workshop series was created through the Holocaust and Genocide Education Advisory Committee, which was created to help educators in Connecticut implement state legislation, which was passed in 2018. Normally, we would be holding these workshops at various institutions around the state, but we are very happy to be able to work with you all remotely. Before we start, I do want to see, yes. We do want to do a really quick poll. Only a few questions. This is anonymous, just to see if you've joined us before and your experience with rescue at this point. We would love to hear from you, so please don't be shy. Even some of our committee members, we would love to just to make sure that you know, we have a few varied answers, I guess. This looks good. Excellent. Okay. All right, great. All right, well, thank you very much. So we can get started. So if you have any questions or comments throughout this session, please feel free to send them through the chat function, which you should find at the bottom of your screen. We do hope that this will be a more conversational and interactive session. So we would love to hear your experience in teaching rescue, your ideas, the challenges that you've had, any questions that you have for our presenters. And this will really only help all of us better teach this topic of rescue. I'm very happy to introduce our presenters from this summer's workshop series. Over the last 3 weeks or so, we have provided participants with presentations on teaching rescue in times of conflict. We've covered introductory content and best practices, teaching rescue during the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, and on the lives and legacies of Varian Fry, Janusz Korczak, and Stefo Wilczynska. Today, we want to hear from our participants and presenters. What questions do you have for us? What could we provide you with that will help your students make a deeper connection to Holocaust and genocide studies? Again, please send any of your questions and comments or ideas to your fellow educators here through the chat box, and we can navigate everything together. Before we do that, I am pleased to introduce my good friend and colleague, Ruth Weiner. Ruth is a member of our advisory committee and a Holocaust survivor. She is one of our most active speakers for student groups and has many years of experience as an educator and consultant. I asked her to make some brief opening remarks on her reflections on the topics we have discussed through our sessions this summer, and also on her own experience with rescue and what that has meant to her and her family. So thank you so much for being here, Ruth, and I will turn it over to you. Before you even start, Ruth, though, of course, I forgot. Ruth does have some photos that she would like to share with us. So if you are looking at the screen in gallery view, it might be better to move to speaker view because she will have some artifacts and photos to show you. So with that, I will let her take it away.
Thank you, Kim. Begin with 2 quick comments. Comment number 1. I would like at this point to acknowledge both Kim and the previous participants. This has been a first. There's no playbook. There's been no clear direction as to how this should be shaped and what it should do. I think the one thing everybody was hoping for was that it would be a really good event. And I want to just stress how impressive all of the presentations have been. The quality, the depth, and the insights were beyond excellent. And I would just like all the previous presenters to know. And I really listened quite critically. I thought it was wonderful. And my hat is off to Kim. I think the work she has done is just awesome. Second point I'd like to make is that I apologize for the very primitive way of showing pictures, but we put very little prep time into this, and it wasn't enough for me to learn how to share screen or how to transfer these pictures into something that I could use for sharing screen. So please bear with me if this is not a very polished presentation. But there is a serious point that I would like to make. And I believe it comes from my perspective as both someone with 50 years of experience in teaching the Holocaust, but looking at it nonetheless through the lens of a survivor, where basically what I'm teaching is my own story and that of my family. The only criticism, no, not even a criticism, maybe a critique, that I could make of what has been presented was that the focus as erudite and as excellent as it was, placed the emphasis on people who were larger than life heroes. And the reality of it was that where, for the overwhelming most part, where lives were saved, they were saved not by these larger than life heroes, they were saved by everyday helpers. And there's just this tremendous disproportion if you were to do a statistical comparison of rescues of the type that we have been talking about up to this point, and people who didn't make it. I mean, I don't have to play that out for you. I think everybody in this room is well aware of the tremendous imbalance between the people who did make it and the ones who didn't. So I'd like to do two things. One of them is let me explain how I would introduce this to a group of students, and then let me explore what I believe is one of the basic precepts of teaching Holocaust, and that's there are as many stories as there are people. And as Kim pointed out, that I've been to a lot of places and I have a lot of connections, but this is true for all of us. That was the nature of the Holocaust. When I'm with a group, there's one thing that I do with all of them. Like any teacher, you try something once and it goes real well. So what are you going to do? You're going to try it again. And you get wonderful feedback from your class, so you keep trying it. And that's what has happened with this. I've had nothing but positive feedback from many, many students, from many teachers. And this is what I do. I ask, who in this room has a cell phone? Well, that kind of covers everybody. Whose cell phone has a light on it? Well, that gets 99%. And then the other 1% who's talking to their neighbor and saying, wait, where's the light on my phone? I never knew it had a light. And I say to them this: if you were in a room that had no windows and that suddenly went pitch dark, what would be the first thing that you would do? Well, you invariably get a few kids who say, I would take out my phone and light the light. And I say to them, you are a hero, because what you've done is you've made a hole in the darkness. And then if a few more of you take out your phones and copy that and light the light, the darkness begins to dim. And if everybody takes out their phone and lights the light, you've banished the darkness. And this is exactly that. That's not a bad metaphor. And this is exactly what needs to happen if we are to make any difference at all in the kind of darkness that has brought out about the situations that we've taught about. Let me for a moment give you a quick overview of one family, in this case, my family, and the ways in which minor forms of heroism and what I like to call helpers, not so much heroes, because most kids, when you're teaching them, can see themselves as helpers. They may not see themselves as heroes. Helpers, almost everybody, okay? It's something that's within them. I'm going to start with a picture of me. Now, can you more or less see that? Okay. This picture was taken for a very specific purpose. The year is 1938. I am 7 years old. And the reason for the picture was because my family was desperately looking to get an affidavit. You all know what that is. And they found an address in an American telephone book in the American embassy, a distant cousin of my family's. They wrote to them and they said, we need your help. Could you send us an affidavit? And if you can't send an affidavit, could you please save this child? The family did not have enough money for any one person to send it. One member of the family gathered up everybody else, and together as a group, they did indeed send the affidavit. They were able to save more than this one child. So how was this one child saved? Because there was a group in England called, would you believe, the Hebrew Lads Summer Camp Society. That was their name. And they had a couple of camps. And they said, if we took a bunch of kids out of Europe, we could put them up in these camps. And they went to the British government, and the British government said, you've got to be kidding. Well, they walked away, and they managed to recruit other people of influence, other Jewish groups, and they came up not only with the kinder transport, with the plan for the kinder transport, but with two parallel plans. I'm going to take this down. Two parallel plans. One of them was for something called Kitchener Camp, which I will talk about in a minute. And the other was for a way to bring women out, and I will talk about that for a minute as well. I do not in any way want to diminish the credit due to the British, because no other country was prepared to accept Jews, even very young Jews. And in particular, the families who were willing to take children like myself, knowing that one of two things was going to happen. Either these kids were going to be theirs for the rest of their lives, and there was no careful triage here or matching children to families. Or once they got attached to the kid, the parents would show up again. And I consider that to be, again, huge form of heroism. Here's another picture of myself, and then we'll go on to my parents. Of myself, I'm a little younger there. The woman in the picture was my nanny. Actually, she's 18 there, not Jewish, who, as things began to get worse for the Jews, was absolutely outraged. And when the signs went up everywhere, Jews not allowed, and that was starting with the park, where the sign was, no Jews, no dogs, no spitting allowed. And no museums, no theaters, no concerts, no anything. She showed up one day, put her hands on her hips, said to my father, this child is a daughter, because I remember it, this child is a daughter of Vienna. She's entitled to see all these things. Mr. Frosch, may I take her? And he thought that was fine, but she was the one who was risking her neck. But take me, she did, and I saw more plays and more operas and more than I really had any great desire to. To this day, I'm grateful to her for doing it. Let me introduce you to my mother. and to the document that brought her out. Here. This is what she looked like at the time. This is her passport. Here, I'll just turn a couple of pages, only because I want you to see what a typical passport looked like. All the pages look like that. There is stamp after stamp, all kinds of different authorities, the police, the bank, the neighborhood, German leader, Nazi leader. And for each of those stamps, you know that somebody stood in line, not hours, days. And there was a very strange culture in the line that people who remembered you from the day before would let you back in. That if one person at the front of the line got a piece of information, instead of keeping it to themselves, they would pass it to the back of the line. Now, again, were these people heroes? No. Did they make a huge difference? Absolutely. I want to show you 2 pages that were life or death. There is this one, I'm going to read it. It is a visa for the United Kingdom for single journey only, for domestic employment exclusively. And when you landed, you had to go through a special line. And it says, permission granted this day in Dover on condition that the holder, it's blocked out with another stamp here, registers at once with the police and does not enter any employment other than as a residence in service in a private household. So my mother, who herself had had a maid at one point, was now a maid. And that was how we were able to get to England. But then here's the winner. This one right here, okay? And that is the immigration visa number 541, which said that we could come to the United States. And again, each one of these stamps has a story. Kitchener Camp. The British at the behest, oh, Red, get that. I'm so sorry. Okay. The British, at the behest of this group, which was known as Bloomsbury House, you know, it's like the Pentagon had a whole series of groups inside it, of a military nature. This was the various Jewish groups who had united to try to somehow aid the refugees. Came up with the idea that there was something called Kitchener Camp in a town called Sandwich in Kent in England. All of this is near Dover, near Canterbury. And what they did is they took and threw up some more barbed wire around the camp. And they said, okay, folks, this camp is now yours. These people are not free to come and go. However, they're not really in England. We're going to make believe that this is an international zone, and they may come. Here you see 2 men. The one with the glasses is my father. The other one is an uncle. The uncle happened to be a mechanical engineer. Well, they heard about him. He was with the first group that went to Kitchener Camp. Why? Because he could help turn that camp into a refuge for them. And indeed he did. The other one, my father, was not so gifted. And when we left late in June of 1939, I to go to the Kindertransport, my mother to go to her job as a maid, he was still in Vienna. He was left behind. He came out 3 days before the war started and went to this Kitchener camp. Why am I telling you these stories and not even telling you any of the details? I think there is a technique when you're working with kids where you do not do the details, you do not do the things. You give them an overview in the same way that you do an overflight by a drone to establish what this territory is like, that you can then subsequently place things in context. And I'd like to do just a little bit more of that. And that as you hear this, I apologize, that as you hear this, I know there are many gifted teachers in the room. I'm absolutely positive that somewhere in the back of your mind is I could use this as a teaching opportunity. I could use that as a teaching opportunity. This particular piece of information might fit in here. But I'm telling you this because these are real people with real stories. And that's what it's all about. Now, if you haven't had enough real stories and real pictures, let me show you this picture. This is my father's family, and they are representative of almost everything. Can you see it okay? Of almost everything that any of us have had an opportunity to talk about. I'm going to start with him because he has perhaps the most unusual story. He was not a brother. The rest are all brothers and sisters. He was a cousin whose father died at a very young age, and who was raised together with the rest of them, so that he was exactly like a brother. Very gifted person, became a very well-known lawyer in Vienna. But the thing that saved him was not his practice of law. The thing that saved him was that he was also a gifted musician. And his fun thing was that he was the rehearsal conductor for the Vienna Philharmonic. Before they went to the performance conductor, he was the one that put them through their paces. And he particularly liked doing vocal things. Why am I telling you this? One of his singers was somebody from England. When everything blew up and everything went wrong and he was trying to get out, somehow this British singer that he had been in touch with went, and he was active in the Anglican Church, went to the person in charge of music in the Anglican Church and said, I know of this man, his name is Adolf Ehrenfeld, and we could use him as a conductor. And sure enough, they gave him a permit to come to England as a conductor, and then he found himself in an abbey, but he was conducting music. The next thing that happened was that he was defined as an enemy alien and was placed in a prison camp. That was followed by the prison camp was emptied, whoever was in it, they didn't care who you were, and was shipped to Australia. And the next time we heard from him, he was sitting in Australia in a prison camp with a group of prisoners. Okay? Who was it that saved him? Someone else from that particular religious musical group who happened to be in Australia. Okay? Next to him, this was his friend at the time. Next to him is the youngest brother, who was the first one to come to this country. They escaped by way of what was then called Yugoslavia, because they spoke fluent Croatian and knew their way around. Came to this country and felt that he had to enlist. Enlisted in the service, was wounded and decorated in France, sent back, and because he was not fit for active service, then became an intelligence officer and was questioning the Germans at Wiesbaden. Okay, story of the next one. Okay, he fled not once but twice over mountains. Once over the Alps into Switzerland, where he was shot by a Swiss soldier. I know that's an anomalous thing. Was shot by a Swiss soldier, came back wounded. The wound healed. This time he went over the mountains into Italy. Was taken by an illegal ship to what was then Palestine. Was a very good swimmer, so he was one of the people who had to leave the ship and swim to shore, where he was rescued by the Jewish pioneer groups, what they call the Chalutzim, and lived first illegally in Israel and then became a high officer in the Israeli police. Okay, many hands involved in that rescue, clearly. This couple here, they also escaped through Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was a pretty calm place right at the time of the Anschluss. They were not actively involved, and they all spoke Croatian fluently. But then when things got too hot in Yugoslavia for them to be, and they stayed with a sister who I will introduce you to in a minute, they then fled with the help of partisans, fled to Italy, lived in a cave for an extended period of time, and then were part of the group that came to Fort Ontario, the only rescue effort that America undertook. And if you have an interest in that, it's a great story and a book that you would like. I would recommend Ruth Gruber and her book called Haven, because she joined the group in Italy and traveled with them to Fort Ontario. It has many interesting things. My story would not be complete if I didn't introduce you to these three ladies, right here, sorry. They were the generation that did not make it. Okay, one of them was a music teacher. One of them was a bank employee, and for a Jewish woman to be a high-level bank employee was just completely unheard of. And then she was the one who kept the family going. They were the sisters of my grandmother who died young, and they raised her family for her. And really were like, I had three grandmothers on that side, not one. And there was nobody there to help them. And we were able to track them as far as Theresienstadt, Terezin, which was the transit point for the Jews from Vienna and Prague. We know that the one who was a musician was active in the music program there. We got that from somebody who was actually in Terezin. But there was no help from them. We're not able to track them any further. We know that this one died in Treblinka, which we heard about in the last thing. And the last ones who were rescued were these two ladies who were the world's greatest cooks. And the family in England that got them as a maid and a cook, and they interchanged because they both hated to clean and they both loved to cook, were among the luckiest people in the world. So all of this comes under the heading of rescue. None of it is dramatic. None of it is what you would call a hero. I didn't talk about the bribery that had to be involved. There were people who had to be bribed in order to do what needed to be done. But it happened. So it was a rescue. You could have a wonderful conversation with kids about that. And they'll tell you what they think. So again, let me leave you with a thought. There are as many stories as there are people. None of these things are simple or clear-cut or easy. And I have just one piece of advice for the teachers who are listening. If any of you are about to go teach Holocaust, and it goes like this: you are about to teach the darkest heart of what humanity is capable of. And there's no harm in telling that to the kids. That is what they need to know after they've forgotten the dates and after they've forgotten the events. If they can keep that with them, that on the one hand, humanity is capable of things that are absolutely unbelievable for people like them, people like ourselves. But on the other hand, and we've taught that to them all along, that one person alone rarely has the answer. If you get enough people of goodwill functioning together, that's the answer, and it's the only answer, and that's what you would like to equip them to be. So I'm sorry I've spent so much time talking about my family, but they're the story on this one.
Thank you so much, Ruth. I really appreciate you preparing some remarks for us, and I'm sure our participants and committee members alike all learned something new from what you just told us, and just being able to witness how students do react to meeting with you and speaking with you. It is very clear that you have a profound impact on them. And so I do want to open questions up to from the participants for both Ruth and our presenters on maybe some things that we have talked about over the last few weeks. And what I think has been really wonderful is that in every session we've had recurring themes that I think Dr. Hilton actually started us with in the very beginning, with introduction and best practices. And we've seen a lot of these themes popping up again over the last few weeks. So maybe just to get us started, and I'll ask our committee members maybe to unmute themselves, or I don't know, raise your hand when you have something to say. But because everyone has a kind of different expertise, so we have experts on the Holocaust and Rwanda and Bosnia and Armenia here. I'm wondering if you have, maybe you can start with giving our teachers some advice on those who are teaching maybe various episodes of genocide, or so comparative genocide, and how to deal with making, maybe making those threads, continue through curriculum. We often see, that when people make comparisons, we'll say, it's a way for students and individuals to start understanding a new piece of information. But we also know that comparisons also lead to misunderstandings and oversimplification. So what kind of advice could you offer teachers in the classroom when they are going to start dealing with these issues in the classroom? I know that's a big question, but I'm going to throw it out there, and I'll look for some hands or for people to maybe unmute themselves to make their comments. Who wants to go first? I see David Simon. There you go.
Colleen, so I'll just start because mine will be really quick. I just really recommend going to like the USHMM site and just really looking at rationale and really thinking, why am I teaching this, and what do I want to get, and just go through those questions on rationale. So that will help you clarify how you're going to teach and what you'll include and what you won't. And I think Mrs. Weiner gave the best advice about that darkness, and I thought that was brilliant, about shedding that these are the lights and all these lights together. I thought that was brilliant. So thank you for sharing that.
And I'll jump in then. Can you hear me? Am I good? Okay. I'll jump in and say yes, I agree with Colleen on that, and also agree with Colleen's appreciation of what Ruth had to say. That we ask, just the starting point, why are we teaching this? It's something that happened in history, or these are events that happened in history. So it's, is it like the Peloponnesian War or the French Revolution, the Boxer Rebellion, something that students should know because it's in the canon of events that should be known? I mean, yes, but that's not nearly all of it. It's also to understand the full range of of humanity from its least humane, its most evil in a way, and to understand why and where that evil pops up. It's not just bad people being bad, but there's a whole confluence of social factors that lead to badness, if I may, manifesting itself in such a dangerous form. And I think that's important for students to understand. But the reason why I think it's important to talk about rescue, even though it's the statistical aberration in many of these cases, is because it's the flip side of it. It is, or at its best, it's the flip side of it. It is that it's the best of what humans can be, putting themselves at risk to save, putting their own lives at risk often to save another life, and that is that's what humans are doing, and that there are institutions that endeavored to do that. The story of the camp in the UK is one of people working together. It's not just a solo effort, and that's important as well. And then there's all the range in between. There's the sort of the compromised rescues, the taking bribes, the rescuing and with one hand and perpetrating with the other, or ignoring some bad things and participating in others. It's recognizing that that allows you to recognize that humans are complicated individuals that are not so easily summarized. But the final point about this for me is the importance of allowing, and this goes back to the cell phone, the light and the darkness metaphor, allowing students to see themselves as part of a community in which they're vested and in which their choices matter. And I think that that's something you don't get from teaching the Peloponnesian War and the Boxer Rebellion. You do get, you have to get from teaching Holocaust and genocide, the understanding of the role of the individual in society, and the responsibility that these young people carry with them at all times. Once you've learned about this, and once you've learned about what's happened in the past, the range of choices that people did or did not take, then it is on you to, the range of decisions available to you. If you can recognize the situation that you're in, and part of it is to teach students about the situation they may find themselves in, you know what your choices are, or you have the tools to figure out what choices are in front of you. And there is this sort of moral component where you're asking, enabling, encouraging students to make the right choice.
Thank you, David. And if there's anyone else from the committee that would like to put their input in here, we're more than welcome.
I'd like to respond if there's time.
Yes, please, David.
Okay. I guess my first response would be that I wouldn't put myself in a position of really advising teachers about how to proceed, and I try to provide some information that they can then decide how to use, or something along those lines. And I would love to have the opportunity to hear from classroom teachers about their experiences. But I did think, well, when you asked the question, I thought of three, how do we say, the reasons for what we're trying to do. And one would simply be the importance of finding a way to remember what happened and remember the victims. There's this well-known statement by Elie Wiesel. He said to forget the victims is to kill them is akin to killing them a second time. So sometimes I'll pose this to my students, and I'll say, imagine you went through life without taking this class, and you'd never heard of the Armenian genocide, for example, or you never heard of the Bosnian genocide. Or I've had students from other countries who didn't recognize what a boxcar was in a film about the Holocaust. They didn't share the same iconic references as other people. So exposure to what happened is important because it's part of remembering. We were engaging in the process of remembering, which would be important. The second point would be something like making analogies, critical analogies, which are not saying that things were the same, but that there were certain similarities that are important in terms of recognizing causes of genocides, across genocides. And I think the reason for critically recognizing causes would be to think about the possibility of prevention. So it's not just a intellectual exercise, but recognizing, examples of dehumanizing rhetoric, hate speech, the use of media, and seeing this across history as one of the common precursors for genocide. I remember a kind of rally at a church on the Green in New Haven about refugees being interned or put in cages, children being put in cages on the border with Mexico. And I was asked to talk about, put this in the context of the history of genocide. So I thought that was an important connection that was made between people concerned about the current situation and history. So causes, understanding the causes, thinking critically, and thinking about prevention. And I think the last thing I was going to mention about our topic, rescuers, is that it seems to me that one of the positive things about rescuers, in addition to everything that David was mentioning, was that they provide a prism through which to understand the context of what's going on. Alan asked a question in the chat about whether we provide a context. And I mean, I'm just summarizing the question, but I think you can't teach something like this without a context. I've translated many books, and it seems to me that there's no meaning without context. And so, and one thing you can, so the prism of the rescuer, the prism, the lens, you look through what the rescuer's experience, and you see the context. And I would say, in many ways, what that context gives us is the impossibility of the task that the rescuer faced. So it's not a idealized story, but it's about their remarkable, courage and luck in the face of impossibility. For many people, it's the first time. For example, when I talk about Bering Fry, it's the first time they've heard of discriminatory Jewish laws in France, or the fact that there are hundreds of concentration camps in France, or that people were deported from France to Auschwitz. So there, so that I'll stop with that now. I'd like to come back, and there's something I was going to continue to talk about, but I don't want to be an over participator. I'll leave it there, and hopefully have a chance to come back later. So thank you.
Thank you, David. Oh, yes, Stu, and then I do want to get back to Alan's question here. Go ahead, Stu.
Oh, okay. This will be quick. I was thinking that, without studying history, we really have no path to the future. And as Tom Lantos, the only Holocaust survivor to ever serve in the United States Congress, said, that the path to a more civilized world is paved with human rights. And what better stark way to demonstrate human rights, or the lack of human rights, than these kinds of events? And I believe that to be true. And I had mentioned memorials and David Pettigrew, your question to me has been on my mind for a while now, about whether or not memorials have been removed in Europe. And I think the other aspect of memorials and monuments is that they reflect our values. And when we have values, when we have memorials rather, to these kinds of people who did these extraordinary things, it allows it allows people to be energized by those values. I think it's one of the reasons why memorials that we've been taking down in this country deserve to be taken down, maybe put into a museum or something. But the thought of a Black child walking past those memorials and having some thoughts of being inferior, or having a white child walk by and aspire to that kind of immorality is a painful thought. And it's one of the reasons why I think we can learn something from the Germans when it comes to memorials and monuments. There are none in Germany of Nazi heroes. There just are none. And but they've been able to put the spotlight not on themselves as heroes and not on themselves as victims, but rather on the people that they victimized. And I think that's one of the directions that we in the United States are moving now. And I think we hopefully we'll get there.
Thank you, Stu. So I do want to go back to Alan's question here. Again, to if the presenters and even if we have participants here on how they deal with context surrounding rescue. Alan says, for example, do you address what was possible or seemingly improbable, if not impossible? Similarly, do you do this by time, location, access of knowledge of what is happening in a particular genocide or within various genocides? There's a lot to unpack there. I do believe Dr. Hilton addressed some of this in our first session, but I would be interested in hearing any of our presenters or also our participants what your method of this is. If you do have a particular system that you are comfortable with and how you teach this. So if anyone would like to jump in on that. Alan, I don't know if you had some comments on that, if you'd like to jump in.
Oh, no, I was putting the question off on all of you. But, you know, the major issues here are the issues that we constantly confront, which is how much time do we really have? How much time does the educator have in middle school and high school to give to this topic? If they're very fortunate to be able to spend a couple of weeks, or if they're extremely fortunate, they might have a class that's dedicated to human rights, or if you're doing this through civics, you know, and how you approach these types of things. So I think Ruth is right. I think that, and what everybody like David was saying, both Davids were saying, in terms of context and providing that context so the students can get in there and see it. And one of the things that with my good friend Stu is and I don't mean to put a spotlight on you, Stu, but here it goes, is making his students feel. And how do you do that? And, you know, is it feeling through, you know, just doing the easy thing like showing photos that might be inappropriate? Or is it through experiencing what an individual has gone through? Or what is it like when they go through a monument? And what do they feel? What is it that they're really internalizing? So, you know, we can't, in all school systems, it would be great if we could say, okay, look, we're going to devote a month to this. But it's pretty improbable. Hopefully, it's a week, and certainly not just a day or two, because I think that's not really doing the mandate justice, or doing your students any justice. So what is it that we're going to do? And that's why I think rescue is such an important topic. You know, could we talk about, you know, all the partisan activity? Could we be talking about so many other topics, like we talked about Janusz Korczak? But we very easily could have talked about the entire experience of the Warsaw Ghetto. But time doesn't allow that. So these are the kind of things that we hope teachers can take and students can grasp onto. So, you know, I think that the question itself is open-ended enough where the average educator can say, ah, I know my kids. And that's what the approach I want to take.
Ellen, if I could, no, go ahead,
Oh,
Christine, please.
so I was going to say, I haven't been in the teaching role for a while. I'm a stay-at-home mom right now, but I formerly taught world geography. So, like you said, we did not have like a week, a month set aside to teach the Holocaust. But what we decided to do when we revamped our curriculum is rather than study like a region each like section of the year, we study different topics and we would just keep coming back to them. It allowed us to study things like the Rwandan genocide and Holocaust side by side, and then we would continually touch on those themes throughout the year. And something that I liked to do, whether it be something like being a rescuer or genocide, is I liked to introduce my class and give them a taste of things to encourage them to dig deeper in their own time. Because I think what you really need to do is encourage kids to dig into these topics throughout their life. Like, we don't want kids to stop learning once they leave that grade level. We don't want them to stop leaving once they graduate from high school, and to be informed as they go throughout their life with themes that are happening, like the anti-Semitism in Poland that is on the rise again. And so something I would do is I would either show like a short like film clip, like for 5 or 10 minutes at the beginning of class. I would have them read excerpts of stories and they would be like, oh, give me more. And I'd be like, that's your job. You need to go like find these things. And they would. It was really refreshing when you give them a taste of something real and you make it personal, how they will continue to seek those things out.
Beautiful. Thank you, Christine. That's wonderful. David, I think you were also about to.
Yeah, I was just going to add, and you know, I'm talking about working with college students, but they're honestly not that different from high school students, particularly when they're approaching something like genocide in Rwanda. I was going to say one strategy that addresses context in a very superficial but important sense is just to have visuals and a sense of location, voices. Rwanda, for if you haven't thought about it or been there or studied it, Rwanda seems exotic in some sense. It's really hard to picture what it's like, and perhaps the very few images that people have are either of acts of killing, or perhaps the Tutsi dances that were used in old films like King Solomon's Mines and things like that. There's nothing that really hints at everyday ordinary life. And I think both the genocide and rescuing from genocide is the lessons that we've all been talking about, but that I was referencing before about making this sort of usable information for people's lives. It helps to have it anchored or connected some ways in something relatable, like a visual of what's the street where this happened, what did it look like. If someone talks about hiding in being hidden in a in the ceiling, a picture of what a ceiling looks like. And there actually, there's a real insufficiency in the materials like that out there. I think that a sort of visual guide to rescue, in some sense, would be tremendously useful, like that, just to make it that much more real, so that people could say, yeah, that situation isn't my situation, but I can imagine myself there, rather than just some, Rwanda is an abstract concept or construct that you can't imagine yourself in something that abstract. And I think the same, for most high school students, the same probably applies for Central European locations as well. It's it's hard to imagine what there looks like. And it may be easier to sort of find those visuals that provide, in a very literal sense, context that can help students relate.
Can I just add something, or I could?
Sure.
I was looking at my thing to unmute my microphone, so I missed if somebody raised their hand. I wanted to just reinforce what David was saying in terms of visuals. That when my students create PowerPoint presentations about the Rwandan, the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, I encourage them to incorporate as many maps, and images as they can. I pretend to be very excited about excited about maps, and I want to see. Don't forget the maps. And the other thing I discovered that can be really interesting is that Google Earth can give you close-up images of the places where these happen, so you can see the relationship between Hotel de Micolin, where Paul Rusesabagina was located, and the I think l'Église de Sainte-Famille, where Father Wenceslas was located. You have Paul, who saved 1,200 people, and Father Wenceslas, who was handing people over to be killed and has been indicted and prosecuted, but he's escaped. He's escaped prison. But you can actually see the real places, and I think David's right. This is extremely. It gives it a more visceral, feeling. And that's one thing. Genocide studies is so interdisciplinary in this sense. It gives an opportunity for history, for geography, and so forth. So, thanks for that idea, David.
I'd just like to piggyback. I'll be real brief. I'd like to piggyback on what you guys have been saying and what Christine kind of talked about, because I think, Christine, you have a big part of the answer, because if I'm doing a presentation and I want the students to understand, if you're talking about the Holocaust, you need to talk about anti-Semitism and, to answer why the Jews. So if I'm going to do that, I can't stand there and give them an explanation of anti-Semitism in 10 minutes. It's just not possible. But if I use the video, there's videos out there from 11 to 14 minutes from Yad Vashem's website or from the David Wyman Institute and their website, which are outstanding. Within 15 minutes, these kids are now going to have an understanding, all the brief and an overview of over 2,000 years of history and the development of anti-Semitism. Whereas I, as a presenter, and the way that I present, it would take days. But anyway, so I think that you really hit the nail on the head.
Oh, well, thank you.
And how those visuals are important.
Yeah.
And I'll defer to Steve.
Thanks. I with all due respect, I agree with all of this idea about these visuals to help students better understand situations and places and things. I've always found teaching why I love my job, and I'm going back on Monday under all of this stuff, so I must love it. Somebody's going to have to explain it to me, but be that as it may, I love storytelling. And I think that we have the most unbelievable stories to tell. And often there are those, I know this is how I feel, others who are much better able to tell the stories than I am. And for example, when Alan was talking about anti-Semitism, there's a wonderful little short story called Prelude by Albert Halper. And it talks about anti-Semitism in the United States in 1938. I mean, it's this prescient short story. It's amazing that he would have written this when he did without knowing what was going to happen a few months later. So with those visuals that you guys are describing, and I absolutely agree with you, there is something about storytelling that is tremendously powerful. Whether it's from us, the teacher, telling a story, or whether it's in written form, or however we might utilize it, it is a way for students to begin to, on their own, this notion of the Coalition of Essential Schools and student as worker. How do we somehow encourage the student to be the worker, not us giving them the information and them absorbing it? Let them go for it and investigate and critically think about what it is they're finding. So however we might incorporate storytelling into this through whatever medium you might use, that I have always found to be, for me anyway, very effective. So.
If I might interject a little bit. Yeah, I think that that's really important, like you said, about making things personal. And then the other thing is, I think sometimes, and it depends upon what grade level you're teaching this in when the Holocaust is first introduced and how much information kids have years on, like if you're like myself, who's a secondary teacher, that they arrive with and what they arrive remembering, is that when you look at what happened in the Holocaust, sometimes I think kids, especially because the U.S. entered the war so late, like, oh, bam, this just happened. No, there are warning signs after warning sign after warning sign with almost every single instance of genocide. Holocaust, you look at what happened in Rwanda. And so I think that's really, again, important for them to see comparisons between these things, that when you see people demonizing people that they know, people like their neighbors, and it made me even think of like what happened. So a little background, I lived in Germany for almost 2 years because my husband was in the US military, and we visited East Germany, and I thought, oh my gosh, like, okay, you survived the Holocaust, and then, oh my gosh, you're overtaken by communists, and it's like the same thing all over again. You have people spying on their neighbors, like we visited the Stasi Museum, and it is like, it made the hair on my neck stand up, because the amount of record keeping that they are like getting, that when you turn people against their fellow people, that is so dangerous. Like, it was just terrible. And when you talk about memorials, we went to Sachsenhausen outside of Berlin, and it did not dawn on me. I mean, there's so many layers of history there, that when the communists took over Sachsenhausen, well, they used it again for re-education, and then they left out part of the story. They erected this huge memorial in the middle to communists who were killed by the Nazis, but they did not mention the other people groups. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like, you've got to be kidding me. And then in the little town that we lived in, there was a very small, I would say, like, muted memorial to people who died in World War II from that town. And like, it just kind of surprised you at first, because it was just a brass plaque with a helmet, and that was it. And I do think it's important to have those things, because I think it's very easy for people to think like, this didn't happen here. People from my community were not involved in this. Like, that is part of the story. I mean, this was a little small farming village that I lived in, and to see that, and then also think like, well, how old were these people that were involved? Were they like forced into the Hitler Youth, or were they adult collaborators who were fueling this on? I mean, it was just like, it was a very different experience. And even though I love history and I know everything that happened there, something that just kind of hit me like a freight train that I wasn't expecting was with like the first week of arriving, when I would drive around the countryside, I was just kind of filled with this sadness, because I knew all of the really terrible things that happened there, like, that were not that long ago, less than 100 years ago. Like, I just kind of felt physically ill at different points. So, and my faith is, I'm a Christian, and what really upset me is I see crucifixes everywhere, and I'm like, what? Like, how? I think, again, that was a really important thing to say. How did this happen when you have people who have this faith, but they're not living it out, and you're doing this to other people? So So yeah, a little bit of rambling, but it was just, yeah, I think it's important to have all those pieces and tell it like a story and tell it comparatively and plant those seeds where once those kids leave your classroom and it exit the education system, that this does not get turned off, that they see these switches that are getting flipped in different areas of the world or in our own nation of like hatred and demonization of people.
Thank you so much, Christine. And I had a little background. I had corresponded with Christine beforehand. I lived in Leipzig for nearly 4 years in East Germany, and I used to live around the corner from the Stasi Museum. And I'm picturing it as you say, you're walking around. And I think what is really different for American students is that we don't have that World War II history. We don't we don't have that European World War II theater history here. It can be very difficult for American students to make those connections. That why is it important to me? Why is it important that I know what happened from 1933 on? And just a very quick anecdote, I taught English to adults in Germany, and when I lived in Leipzig, I had a student who had been protesting in the late 1980s in Leipzig, this they called this peaceful revolution that had taken place there, and he had been beaten by police and arrested and all this stuff. He told me in one of our lessons one day, he said, one day I met this guy somewhere doing some sort of hobby, I think. They got to be fast friends and they started talking about what they were both doing in the late 1980s when this was happening. This man was one of the police officers at this protest and had taken part in beating protesters back. But after they had spoken about it and after they had kind of shared everything that they felt about that, they had been fast, they were very good friends. And East Germany is a very strange place to be even today. And so that kind of history is so present still. And that also that fear in East Germany is still, you can see it's very palpable there. And so I think that is important to make this as personal as possible for American students, because I find that we do have to make put a little bit more effort into making that connection. Why are we connected to Europe in this way? Why is it important for American students to know what happened in Bosnia and Rwanda and Cambodia? And so thank you so much for that insight.
I was gonna say, Ruth is a great link. Like that's the part that's hard here is we're losing these links, and that's why forget what project it was. I want to say Stephen. There's just so much out there. Like consumes so many things. I get mixed up, so forgive me. But they interviewed a bunch of Holocaust survivors, and they used these special cameras that made them appear in 3D, and the number of questions that they ask and the way that they pose these questions, that they did it so like in perpetuity, it would seem like you're interacting with a real person. So people can like ask people questions. Do you know what project I'm talking about? I cannot remember the name.
I think it might have been, is it the same? They had it at the Museum of Jewish Heritage. It was Dimensions and Testimony.
They're holograms.
Okay.
And the
Yes.
reason we can't
Yes.
remember the places because they take them from one place to another.
Yes. Yeah. It was, amazing. And that again is a great resource. Like if you give your kids like 5 or 10 minutes of that, they will go nuts for it. I have to say, I don't as a student myself. And then when I was teaching, kids love this kind of stuff. Typically they're like so into it because it is so personal and it's so dramatic. I mean, people's lives are hanging in a balance, and they're regular people. We're not talking about just people who are in service to their country. We're talking about people who they were the butcher, people who were the seamstress. They're just disappear, or they escape. Like what happens to them?
Absolutely. So we're a little past 4 o'clock, and so I think we will have to bring this to a close in just a moment. So I do want to thank all of our participants and our presenters, everyone who has joined us over the last 3 weeks or so to engage in these conversations. I have to say, I've been in love with every single session that we've had. And all of the conversations that we've had, it's been such a tremendous opportunity to work with everyone here. And so thank you all for your participation. I do want to welcome the rest of our presenters if they have any final comments about the sessions or about today's conversation. I will turn it over to you.
I just wanted to thank you, Kim, for everything. Ruth today for moving presentation, and all of my colleagues and guests. I sort of wanted to ask Colleen to have the last word, but somebody else may have something they wanted to say, because I thought Colleen's presentation about Stephania was so interesting, and your passion for the topic was so palpable. I thought it was kind of a good model for other teachers, that that we're always learning new things, and I think that our success as a project will depend on people being interested, excited, and inhaling new information. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts about your presentation about Stephania.
It's a little nerve-wracking being the last person called up, but that's okay. But I have to admit, a few years ago, I just heard somebody say, they were talking about Janusz Korczak, and they said, remember the women behind him, and that just resonated with me so much. And so whenever I hear somebody talk about him, that there are all these people behind him, and then when you hear, his story isn't well known, as we discussed, and her story is even less known, and there really are no memorials to her. And I understand that he was the face, and he was the writer, and he was the man that, he was outgoing. And she just kind of, I resonated with her because she was just so, oh, I'm just working a little bit, or I'm just doing this, and there's really no records. And I think she really wanted to stay in Palestine because she was just so overworked, and I think she needed, but then she couldn't because there was that pull to the children. So she's just such a woman who just gave everything. And what I think she's okay with not, I don't want to speak for her, but I'm just, based on the little I know, I think she's okay to be in the background. I don't think she would want memorials or to be remembered, because I think she kind of saw herself as, she, to me, it was almost like a 1930s version of a husband and wife, that I will be there to support him so he can do the important work. And that's message of that, everything else is just for his being able to do what he did. And I just think it's an important piece for young women to hear, but yet she did so much, and I don't think she saw herself as accomplishing as much. So maybe because I'm a woman who grew up in that time somewhat, and she just really spoke to me in a very personal way. And again, because like Stu, I love stories, and that's how you remember. And her story is just touched me in a lot of ways because of how she lived her life and how she dedicated her life, and is just, I think she has this cemetery, but I think and when I see the memorials, I think, well, where is she? But I think she's okay with that, if I can dare to think I could speak for her. I don't think she'd be comfortable in that spotlight.
Well, I'm glad it was part of the presentation with Stu. That was great. Thank you.
Right, yes.
For both of you.
Yeah. And I pushed my way in there too, because I said, let's talk about the woman. So I just pushed my way right in. Sorry, Stu, but thank you for your generosity.
After being married 48 years, I'm used to it, so no worries.
Thank you.
Colleen, I think we're finally learning how to interrupt. Sorry guys, it takes a while for women to find that voice, and I was so pleased that actually, David, thank you for mentioning this, because Colleen, you did present on women rescuers and acts of rescue in Rwanda, and then again on Stefania, and so it's certainly a piece of the story and a piece of the puzzle that makes the ideas more complete, that makes the story more complete, and so thank you for that. I think that's a wonderful note to end on. It has been a beautiful few weeks with you all. I will send out some follow-up information. I've made a few notes of some of the resources or materials that have just kind of come up in conversation, and so I hope that we can kind of send those out to participants afterwards. So thank you all again, and we look forward to creating the next series with you and to work with you all again. If there is anything else that this committee can do for you teachers or your colleagues, we are always here, and we wish you a wonderful school year. Be safe, enjoy being with the kids again, and with or without the kids again, and we will see you next time.